Welcome to Load the Box. I don't know what was worse, me going to the dentist this afternoon or the Minnesota Vikings looking like the junior varsity team on Sunday night against their arch rival. However, here we are. The Vikings are 7-9. They are still mathematically alive, although a lot of things have to happen. And we're back to Nick Mullins. Jordan, how are you?
Devastated that Jalen Hall was not like immediate season three Patrick Mahomes, unstoppable. He really wasn't even, my comp was maybe he can be Sam Howell, who played pretty well in his one game audition last season for Washington and then had a pretty good, I'm going to say like 3 quarters of the year this year in Washington, aside from the fact that he kept getting sacked. And then lately he's kind of turned into a complete pumpkin. But there was, to me, big takeaway from this game. Just going to dive right in. The Vikings are in the quarterback of the future market because I don't think Jalen Hall looked like he had anything up his sleeve for the Green Bay defense that was missing its starting linebacker, 2 starting corners. I mean, they were throwing a lot of backups in there at home, every advantage in his, in his side of the field, whatever you want to call it, in his bag. Unable to do anything with it. It was really disheartening to watch.
Yeah, I mean, having TJ Hawkinson would have helped, but to say that TJ Hawkinson being out was the reason for the struggles would be naive. I think, the positive part of having someone like Hawkinson is, tight ends are the security blanket. And when the security blanket is Johnny Munt, you're just, a little bit more, you're not as secure.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that was seen on that interception that went off of Munt's hands. It was clearly a miscommunication with Munt and with Hall in terms of where Munt was going to sit down, etc. So, um, in general, though, Jaron Hall looked like a rookie. I mean, there's really there's no question in my mind that he should have gotten a chance, even after all that, because you just simply can't win with the amount of turnovers that Mullins and Dobbs had been, issuing.
Yeah.
But now it's pretty clear that if the Vikings want to win Week 18, which they clearly do, Nick Mullins is going to start, and that is what O'Connell announced just earlier this afternoon.
Yeah, and I think that's the right call. I kind of said, Sunday night after the benching of Jalen Hall, I was like, well, you had to stout him. I get that there's this idea of like, oh, but the Vikings controlled their destiny, and so if they would have just went with Mullins, maybe they win that game and they win against Detroit, and then they're in the playoffs and they don't need any help because Pittsburgh beat Seattle, so they blah 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 whatever. I just for me, as looking big picture, not just looking at maybe we have a Nick Foles Super Bowl craziness occurring, I want to know what 2025 6 7 is going to look like at the most important position in all of sports. And right now, the Vikings, I mean, the best option we have is Nick Mullins next season. Obviously, we could re-sign Coke. We could draft, Michael Penix, who is just a superstar apparently, and everyone loves. And we'll talk about, off-season options, draft scenarios. If the Vikings do reach an extension with Cousins, what that means, whether we love it or hate it, and we'll talk about all that kind of stuff when the time is appropriate. But for the team, I think they had to know, okay, Jalen Hall looks okay in practice. Let's put him in a live game, meaningful at home against the division rival, and see what he can do. And like you said, there was a miscommunication with your backup tight end, which, okay, let's maybe not put that one so much on him. There were also just some bad throws, I will say. Some throws where there's the one specific one where he stepped up and it looked like he was about to launch it to the moon, and the ball kind of fell out of his hand funny and floated into no man's land and fell for an incompletion. On a play that, was one of those when Kirk does that, and, he kind of gets that little cock step and goes to chuck it. You're like, oh, he's got somebody. Like you're thinking like, oh, this is like this might be a touchdown. And it was just so deflating. So I like that the Vikings found out that Jalen Hall, is a fifth round pick and is playing like a fifth round pick. But yeah, Nick Mullins should stout on Sunday. I don't think the Vikings should be tanking and intentionally trying to lose against the Lions. I think they should try to win. And if some things happen and we end up in the playoffs, shucks, man. I mean, if the Vikings want, the quarterback of the future, they're probably talking about trading up to get him, and whether that be trading up into the top 10, top 5, or even something that me and you had discussed, trading up into the first round for a second pick in the first round, similar to what they did with Teddy Bridgewater. I think that those options are on the table, regardless of if you make the playoffs and are picking 16 or 17,
Absolutely.
whatever. Oh, if you miss the playoffs and everything bounces your way and you end up with the number 9 pick. We'll talk about the Lions game later. I think we're going to be in agreement on who wins and who loses. But yeah, man. I mean, talking about this Green Bay game, is Jordan Love good?
It's really interesting to think about. I mean, he has very clearly improved um, from the beginning of the year, from week 8 when the Vikings played them. I think the jury's still out. I think he's serviceable. I think he's proved that much this year. I mean, he's got 30 plus touchdown passes. That's not nothing. That's a decent season for sure. And he's improved as the years gone on. His completion percentage, passer rating aren't very high. But it's his first year starting. Yes, he's been in the league for 4 years or whatever, but it's his first year starting. They got all rookies and second year wide receivers, and you have to give him credit for what he's been able to accomplish from the beginning of the year when it looked like it was just a dumpster fire to, now where they control their own destiny now in making the playoffs, and his ability to move the ball down the field and score touchdowns has been a large part of their success. So I still, when I watch him, and I am by no means a quarterback whisperer, but when I watch him, I still just cringe every time he does that back foot jump in the air throw, like he's trying to be Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. Um, it's objectively bad mechanics, and to assume that that's just going to always work is not something that I don't know. I wouldn't hang my hat on that. He was throwing to a lot of wide open receivers on Sunday, and so his back foot flicks weren't being put into harm's way. Um, but I don't know. I I think we saw what it looks like when he is playing against a defense that is humming like the Vikings were in week 8 versus where they are in week 17. So I don't know. Like I said, jury's still out, but I'm not convinced either way, but he looks a lot better now than he did earlier in the year, that's for sure.
Yeah, I do think he looks better, but like you said, the Vikings defense is not at all the same unit that it was the last time we played Jordan Love, and we made him look really, really bad, to be honest. And we made a few quarterbacks look pretty bad, down the stretch there. But the defense does feel, and this is kind of a conversation maybe that we want to have. I don't know if it is the scheme that Brian Flores runs is figured out, and Brian Flores will never be a successful defensive coordinator again. More likely, I think what it is I think the personnel just isn't it. Like, I don't think a Caleb Evans is that good of of a true number one defensive back. I don't think Harrison Smith has the same amount of juice in his legs. I don't think the defensive line as a whole, even with Daniil Hunter, gets pressure on its own, so you have to manufacture pressure with blitzes, and that leaves wide open zone gaps because you don't have the personnel to man blitz. I just think that this team finally, it took all this time for it to be like, oh yeah, the defense was like really bad last year, wasn't it? And the biggest addition made was Byron Murphy and Ivan Pace. So that's not enough to. Oh, and I guess Davenport, who played 2 games, so
Yeah.
I think that I just don't think the defensive personnel is there. I think that you need another pass rusher, you need a nose tackle, you need probably a linebacker, you need like 2 corners. I mean, we're talking about this is a full. If this was a house we were talking about, this is a $20,000 house that you need to put about 60 grand into and then flip it for 150. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is not a good
Cheap house,
defense.
dude.
It's a cheap house, and yeah, look, it's got 4 walls and a roof. So Brian Flores was able to make it feel like a home for a couple of weeks. And we got some sleeping bags, and it was springtime, so the weather was nice. And now it feels like we're in the dead of winter, and there's no heat, and we're freezing to death inside of this house because of how badly constructed it is. So definitely need some additions on the defense.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I don't have too much to add. I think it paints a picture sort of how this Vikings season has gone. There was the rough start, kind of for the defense and the offense not being able to hold on to the ball. Once the defense sort of figured out themselves and figured out the nuances of what Brian Flores was asking them to do, and the coverages and the disguises and everything, and the opponents hadn't quite caught up to it yet. The defense looked awesome. Simultaneously, the Vikings offense turned the ball over less, hence they won a lot more games. And then now we're kind of at a point where the quarterbacks have started turning the ball over again. The defense has been figured out now a little bit. There's a lot more film on the Vikings, and what Brian Flores has been able to do is, like you said, he's kind of putting lipstick on a pig in a way. It's like this defense that is made up of a lot of guys that have played well this season, but are probably playing above, like a little bit over their skis. And now we're at this point where the disguises and the coverages and the smokes and mirrors and the checks and all those things are being figured out a little bit more. And so the illusion of an 8-man pressure that drops into an 8-man coverage are not as scary to opponents anymore because they've studied Flores and what he's been doing now for 15, 16, 17 games. And so there's that, and there's also probably just the highs and lows of, like, once the defense started to figure things out a little bit, then all their best players started getting injured, and so then they ramped up the intensity and they sort of rode that high for about half the season and kept themselves alive, and now sort of the wheels just kind of came off a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's to be expected, just given the nature of what this season sort of has required of all the Vikings players and coaches who have been undermanned sort of across the board. So it's not too terribly surprising. I mean, heck, this team was 0-3, 1-4. We've talked about that 1,000 times. And yet going into week 18, that really good stretch in the middle of the season has them now in a position where they still technically could make the playoffs. I don't think that should be dismissed entirely. There is something to be gleaned from that. And I think, large in part, this team has accomplished maybe more in some ways than we kind of thought they would after all the dominoes started falling.
Well, and especially after that 1-3 or 1-4 stout, and then Kirk gets out after you get to 500. It just kind of it felt like everything that could go wrong did go wrong. I'm not gonna do the "this is life as a Vikings fan" shtick. This is life as a football fan. Bengals fans are going through it. They got mathematically eliminated because they lost to the Chiefs because Jake Browning is not an NFL caliber quarterback. And I just if your quarterback misses a large chunk of the season with an injury, you're done. You're cooked. It's just, I know that there are exceptions to the rule, but every rule has its exceptions and has its, actually there was this one time where, and that's what makes, Nick Foles winning a Super Bowl for Philadelphia so, incredibly special and rare. Yeah. Is the fact that never happens. If your starter goes down, you're done. Your season's over. We say it at the beginning of every season. If Coke goes down, the season's done because Nick Mullins, we've seen enough of him to know
Yeah.
he's not going to really lead this. I'll tell you something that I wasn't expecting looking at the schedule this year and ended up happening. The Vikings suck at home. We don't have a home field advantage. We
So
might as well
strange.
be the Chargers. Um, what would we lose? 6. We went 2-6 at
At
home.
2-6 at home.
Pitiful, pitiful record at home. Um, I I don't even know what to say about it. Like a couple of weeks ago, it got announced. Like Jared Allen is one of the like qualifying members to go into the Hall of Fame, and so everyone was sharing that clip where him and Donald Penn, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers left tackle, get into like a fight after a play, and then the very next play, the Metrodome is just on fire, electric. That team stunk that season, but the Metrodome is just going ballistic. And Jared Allen got a sack on the very next play, and immediately, like over Donald Penn, he beat him inside. Like it was a whole thing. Everyone has seen the clip, and I, I don't know, man. Do you think it's a lack of energy, or do you think we just played like the Chiefs at home and Tampa Bay at home, and Tampa Bay is kind of a good team, and our quarterback got hurt? So, like, what do you think?
It's really weird. I mean, I think there is a little bit to my theory of the Vikings defense actually being better on the road when it's quiet. Um, and they're allowed to communicate a little bit better. I think a little bit of it's randomness, timing of opponents. They caught the Bears at home when the Bears were starting to play better. This Packers game, I don't really know what to chalk it up to. That was just a no-show, other than Najee Thompson. But yeah, the Chiefs, the beginning of the season was just dreadful in terms of turnovers. So home or away, it didn't really matter. So I don't know. I think it's really hard to pinpoint one thing. I don't think it's anything to do with like US Bank Stadium will not be a home field advantage. I think it gets really loud in there. I think the Vikings fans are ballistic about this team and crazy about this team, and they will come back and they will sell out every game next season. Um, and so I don't think this is going to be a lasting trend by any stretch, but I don't know. This season was really weird. Um, it's hard to really pinpoint one thing. Um, so who knows? I mean,
I
it could be as simple as the quarterback stuff, but I think it's probably a little bit more random than that.
I agree with you. I don't think that it was a lack of intensity from Vikings fans. I think that there were plenty of times where, I mean, against the Chargers, it was too loud, allegedly, while the offense was on the field. And so they couldn't get a playoff. And everyone was like, you got to be better than that, fans. And this season has had some of my least favorite football moments of all time in it. We might make that a topic for an award show that's coming up. Obviously, if the Vikings season does come to an end against Detroit on Sunday, there is still like 5 weeks of football to talk about before I can, in good faith, start doing mock drafts left and right and pumping out this is who the Vikings should draft and all of that stuff. So we're not gonna do I say all the time, we will never become the show that does like the same topic on repeat or anything like that, but I do think we have some good content and stuff. Next week we're gonna put a bow on the season and also talk about the Detroit game, which is probably important. 2 weeks from now there will be like an award show, or maybe that'll be the put a bow on the season. We've got some good content coming up, so stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and find us wherever you get your podcasts, of course. I'm giving this now because we're supposed to give an ad break time. And so I figured I was going to try to like put a middle point on it. And so about 1918 is the ad break.
Well played.
Yeah, you know what? Let's just call it 1930. That's the ad break time this week. But anyway, sorry YouTube audience who doesn't care about any of that. Do you have anything else on Green Bay, or do you want to move into talking about the Lions?
No, I think we should talk about Detroit. I mean,
Yeah.
It's a good segue. I think to your point, I mean, we're assuming that a week from now when we're talking about the Detroit game, frankly, win or lose, we'll probably be talking about the end of a Vikings season. The playoffs are still mathematically alive. The Vikings are still technically there. They need a lot to happen. They need to beat Detroit. They need Green Bay, Seattle, and New Orleans to lose. All three of them, not one of them, all three of them. And New Orleans and Green Bay are both at home. So
I
it's
think
going to be challenging.
I think New Orleans can win as long as Tampa loses. I think that's because there's a funny one
Is
where
that
it's
right?
yes, it's
Okay.
like two of the like it's Tampa. I'm pretty sure it's Tampa and the Saints. One of them has to lose. The problem is Tampa knows that they're playing for the division, so that it's not like they're putting Baker on the
Yeah,
shelf.
they yeah.
And they're playing Carolina, so not exactly ideal for the Vikings' hopes.
Carolina's not ideal for anybody's hopes.
No,
Yeah.
I think
I
it
mean, hey,
says a
congrats
lot.
to Adam Thielen.
Yeah,
100 receptions, 1,000 yards. I mean, I think a lot of that is a product of being a part of an offense that is anemic and being the only viable option on the outside, but he showed a little spry this year. I was pleasantly surprised by what he was able to turn in. So, good for him.
yeah. I think
Um,
Thielen had a pretty solid season. I do want to say that if it is telling that the Vikings season could come down to, hey, did Carolina get their third win of the season? Not an
yeah.
ideal scenario to be talking about, but we played Detroit. If my theory about you always go 500 in the division stands correct, then the Vikings will win this game, so they will do their part. They just need a bunch of other stuff to happen, which you went over beautifully, by the way. I look, man. I think Detroit's pissed off coming into this game. I think the Vikings are. I don't want to say the team has quit and the team has phoned it in, but I do think that the Vikings are coming off of a blowout loss. They need a lot to happen. There's a chance that like they could already know that they're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs because I think one of the games of the 3 or 4 that we need to be watching happens on Saturday, but I could be wrong about that. If you're fact checking me, I appreciate you, but there's a chance they could be mathematically eliminated by this point. It's difficult to not think Detroit is going to win after they hung 30 on this defense, and I don't see a 180 coming from the defense, although it would be nice. I don't know, man. It's kind of we did this like 2 weeks ago. We did the breakdown. It's mostly the
Yeah.
same teams. I don't think anybody's injured. Dan Campbell said he's playing his Stoutos. They're still alive for the 2 seed, so he's going to try and get the 2 seed.
Absolutely.
Like, and
It's
he's
part of their
pissed.
nature too.
Yeah,
The Lions, by nature, since Dan Campbell came there, is they will fire every bullet in the chamber until they are all gone. It's just who they are. They're ridiculously aggressive. They take risks. They're not going to be resting anybody unless they have to because of injury and all that. So
right.
they're gonna come out firing. And quick fact check on your mathematical elimination stuff based on game time. The 2 Saturday games are AFC games, so those don't
Oh,
affect
okay.
the Vikings. However, the Vikings are in that noon or 1 p.m. Eastern slot, as are the Saints and the Buccaneers. And
Okay.
so you could get a scenario where both those teams are up big at halftime or something, and the Vikings might basically know that they're eliminated
I don't.
in
Yeah,
the
I don't
third
know
quarter.
why. I thought that. I thought the Arizona game, like the Arizona Seattle game, was one of the Saturday games. But I mean, clearly, I'm not saying the internet or
Yeah.
you are incorrect. I just that was my logic behind it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like I said, we've done this breakdown before. I love how you said Detroit's going to empty the gun. They're going to empty the chamber against whoever it is. There is kind of this thought in the back of my mind of like, are they though? Because obviously they want to win the game, but if they have like a trick play where 5 offensive linemen try to approach to the same referee, maybe they leave that one on the shelf for the playoffs this week. But unfortunately, I mean, like, let's talk about what Detroit is, and let's talk very candidly. Not the Vikings. The Lions have a really good offensive line, a quarterback that can't play outside but it's in a dome, so who cares? They have one of the better slot wide receivers in the league, and their 1-2 punch at running back is lethal. I mean, offensively, it is difficult for me to see a world where a Vikings defense that is hemorrhaging right now is going to pull itself together and hold them to 17 so Nick Mullins can, get his first dub of the season as a starter. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I just think this offense is too potent. But, I mean, look, if Mullins plays a clean game and the defense is able to get a couple of turnovers, then we're in business and we're cooking with fire at that point. But, defensive, look, I do think Mullins can move the ball against this Detroit team. The question's just going to be, can he make good decisions and make good throws? Because we talked about it in the post game for the Detroit game a couple weeks ago. Some of those interceptions were not bad decisions. They were just bad throws, which is, you can't really coach out of a guy. So I don't know. Where are you feeling? How are you thinking about this?
I have the same thought. It's on one hand, I would not be shocked if the Vikings won because it's a division game. Like you said, they just played this team. They showed they can play with this team, even though they turned the ball over 4 times. And so in that vein, I would not be shocked if they went to Ford Field and were mad themselves because of how poorly they played on Sunday night and they came out with a surprising victory. But given the trends of where this team is going, with the defense sort of falling apart and the offense continuing to turn the ball over, I can't in good faith say they're going to. I can't for the 5th week in a row say they're going to get another victory and keep seeing them lose. So I got the Vikings losing 34-20. I would like to say Nick Mullins has learned his lesson and won't turn the ball over. And I would like to say the defense would have put up more of a fight than they did on Christmas Eve. But again, evidence has showed me otherwise over the last month, basically. So, if the team does win, though, and my offensive game ball is going to go to Nick Mullins because if the Vikings do win, it's going to be because he carves up their shoddy, leaky, risk-taking defense and doesn't turn it over, and be his first victory of the season. It'll be an obvious game ball for him. So that's kind of where I'm at. It's definitely not a house money game because of what's on the line here, but it's not a game that I am going into expecting a win. It's one more that I'm going to be pleasantly surprised
Yeah.
if they come out with a win. And I need to make that clear. I want them to win. I'm not in the camp right now of hoping they lose. Because you never know with these scenarios. And I think I've been on the record before saying that I think getting into the playoffs it's good for morale, it's good for culture, it's good for experience for players who've never played there before. It's even good for players like Jefferson who's only played 1 playoff game. And so getting there in the first place is a victory, and that matters more to me than getting a few higher spots on the draft board.
Agreed.
You're going to trade up anyways for a quarterback, most likely. And we've seen it before. The Vikings have picked some excellent players in that 20 to 23 range. So I think they'll be higher than that this year, but if they win and they win a playoff game miraculously, then they might be back in that range. So
Right.
it's to me, you play the string out, and like you said last week, you don't take in week 17. So you don't take in week 18 either. So especially when you have a chance to make the playoffs, weirder things have happened.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on the loss. I'm thinking whether or not I should do like a 56-0 Detroit win just to try and make the score prediction game more close, because it's a blowout. I mean, it's bad at this point, but it was bad halfway through the season, and it's just continued to get kind of worse. I'm going to give a realistic score prediction. I'm going to say 31-28. I'm going to say that it's a close game. I mean, I think it's a division rival. And I do think that Kevin O'Connell's going to have these guys buying in. I just don't think the defense can get the stops or the turnovers whenever we need them. Sorry if you can hear my baby starting to have a little bit of a meltdown. So I'm going to quickly
The
say
music.
my game ball. Let's go Josh Metellus. I'll say Josh Metellus, if we win, gets an interception, return for a touchdown, and just ends up winning us the game. Final thoughts, I'll give these, and then I'll let you take us home, calling an audible here slightly. My final thoughts, tune into the show next week and during the offseason. Amazing draft coverage, amazing, just everything. And, thank you guys for being here this season. If you've watched us, we really appreciate it. And Shop Unified, follow the show at LTB Vikings, and follow Will at Will Bad Lose, and check out the Bad Loser blog.
I love the Josh Metellus pick because he went to the University of Michigan. So it's fitting that he'd go home, so to speak, and get a let's just say game-winning pick six, which Jared Goff is not immune to. For me, final thoughts. Little cynical, little snarky. Last season, the Vikings, a lot was made about, the point differential and finishing the season and then in the red, winning 13 games and all that. This year, it took until week 17, getting blown out by 23 points to get into the red finally. After obviously the 0-3 start, the 1-4 start, you're of course in the red because you've only won one game and all that. But after that win streak, and now even after that losing streak, they were still in the black. They still had a positive point differential entering week 17. They are now finally -8. And with a win in Detroit by 5 or more or 6 or more points, they could end up with a better point differential than last year. So I don't know, Jordan. It seems to me like the 2023 version of the Vikings is better than the 2022 version. I don't know. That's what the experts told me last year. Point differential is everything. So
yeah, look
here
at
we are.
Philadelphia's point differential. Philadelphia this year is last year's
Vikings.
The
Vikings last year. Yes. All right, that's all we got. Hopefully we have some more laughs, some more things to chuckle about next week. And not be too cynical about. Hopefully it's a Vikings win and a surprise playoff appearance. For Will and Jordan, this was Load the Box. We'll see you next week. Skol, y'all.